Yes, I was born and raised in Germany, in Upper Silesia, which is somewhere close to Czechoslovakia and Poland. Yeah, in the city. It was mostly industrial. There were a lot of coal there, iron, steel, bricks, you name it. My favorite memories are probably my grandparents and vacations that we used to take, camps I went to when I was younger, some skiing in the winter time, a lot of nice vacation times in the summer. No, went to the mountains nearby, and mountains all around, and usually that's where we go. That's where we went. I had a very nice childhood, actually. I was an only child until I was 6 years old. And then my mother remarried, and I had brother and sister. That was an entirely new experience for me. That my father was in World War I, and he was injured, and a bullet lodged in his thigh, and they never could find it. He died in 1923, just 3 weeks after I was born, from the infection. I never knew him, of course. But then my mother remarried when I was about 6. Very nice man. All the years that my mother and I lived by ourselves, we had lived next door, in the house next door to my grandparents. Because the houses were close together, they were able to break through from one house to the next. They had a very heavy iron door between the two houses, but that way I could go to my grandparents anywhere, anytime I wanted to, without having to go downstairs and upstairs, all that sort of thing. So that was very nice. My grandfather was a tailor, what they called at that time as a tailor master, because he'd been to London to study. I can't even really imagine that. When he did his work, what he did was a fitting, and that's it. And then he handed it over to someone that would do the putting it together. But eventually we lived in a very large apartment. I don't know, maybe 4-story building. And it was above a store. It was something comparable to what would be Macy's today, that kind of store. You know, and then the apartments were above it. That I remembered is that there was a glass roof right outside of our apartment that was over the store, because I remember somebody falling through that. I'd have forgotten it until now. They did some work on the building, and one of the men fell through the roof. I happened to look out the window. I said, you know, I don't know how old I was at the time, maybe 8 or something like that. She was what today would be called a radiologist. Only in those days there was no such thing. However, she had learned it during the war, and she opened her own office and did a lot of radiology for the different doctors in town. They sent the patients to her. There were no radiologists in those days, you know, so this was a brand new field. Exactly, but she always worked in one of the field, what do you call that, hospitals, but not out someplace, it's within a city. She worked there for the Red Cross. She wasn't trained for anything at that point. And she got all her training during the World War, World War One. She met him in one of the hospital settings. They were married in Heidelberg, and assume he finished his studies there. After they got married and he moved into the city that we lived in, he opened his own office. So he had a few years of practicing until the infection from the bullet eventually got him. He was a dermatologist. This was a big school. Well, there were different types of levels of schools. I don't know if they still exist today, but when I went to school, there was if you want to go to school until you're 14, you would not go to the type of school that I went to. If you went to a school where you thought you would eventually want to go to college, then you would go to that school. And then there's still another one that lets children out even sooner, like probably 14, no additional schooling at that point. You have to go in a school that you call either a gymnasium, which is a boys' school, or lyceum, which is a girls' school. But the idea of those schools is that you're going to go for 12 years and that you'll eventually go to college. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the idea. I had an uncle who was an attorney, and whenever I got a report card, I had to go by and show it to him, which did not make me very happy. Yes, he was encouraging, but he was also, now you can do better than this. Like I said, school was really never my favorite thing. And the fact that I went back to school that many years later was a big decision. I did like athletics and bicycle riding and that sort of thing. Not too happy with sitting behind a desk. And that never changed. And I came to this country in 1939. And I've been here ever since, not in North Carolina, but in Miami, and partially in New York. It's because it wasn't safe any longer to live in Germany at that time. It came through Havana. Spent 6 months in Havana, and then came to Miami. That's how I went to Miami first, but didn't stay then. We went eventually up to New York. It was my husband's mother that moved to Miami. My family was up north. I guess she wanted to go where it was warm. That's all I can remember about it. So when she moved to Miami, then her daughter followed, and my husband also thought that was a great idea, but because he was drafted around that time for the Second World War. So I lived in Miami, and my oldest son was born there, and I lived with my mother-in-law for quite a while. I was working at the time at Woolworth in Miami Beach on Lincoln Road. That was the biggest Woolworth in those days in that area. And it was around Christmas time, and a lady came in with her son or whatever he was, I didn't know, and they were looking at the toys, and they were talking in German. So the English didn't go too well, so I talked to them in German, of course, and I helped them out with what they were picking out. And the gentleman that was with her was my husband, eventually my husband. So that's how I met him. I was married when I was 18, like most of us in those days were. It was the beginning of World War II. We got married in November, and he was drafted in January. So then on one of his furloughs, before my oldest son was born, we went on what you would call a honeymoon, a nice place in the mountains near New York. So we made up for lost time. Like most army wives, I did quite a bit of traveling. You know, while he was in, I don't know, Virginia, I was in Virginia for months, and he was in Cape Cod for a while, and I was there for a while. And, Texas, I was out in Texas for a while. That was not a pleasant experience. Not Texas, but the trip there from Miami during the war was just terrible. In those days, there were no air-conditioned cars or anything like this. And here I had a 6-month baby with me, and the cars were full of soldiers and sailors. Lucky for me, I had my son, and so one of the guys got up and gave me a seat.
This was on the train?
Yes, and it was a really awful ride because no air conditioning. Okay, it was a long trip then, and there was all the windows open and all the coal dust in the window. So that was pretty awful. It was. I wouldn't want to do it again. During the war, yes. It wasn't the greatest. As a matter of fact, one day there was a knock on the door. 2 FBI people out there, and they said, don't you know you're supposed to notify us when you travel? After all, I was an enemy alien at that point. I didn't have my citizenship papers yet. I said, no, I didn't know anything about it. Nobody told me. He says, try not to do that again. Try to let us know. I said, you know, my husband is in the service, and if I want to go, I think I'm going to go. And at that point, they didn't know what to say. He said, well, there are certain rules and regulations, and that's one of them. You're considered an enemy alien, therefore you need to let us know if you leave this area. So, okay. What do I have to do? Well, you can call us. Good. I can do that. I really can't remember exactly what he was doing. Surely he went overseas. He went to Europe. He was in Europe when the war ended, which was lucky because otherwise he probably would have gone on to Japan at that point. He became a citizen while he wasn't stationed in Iceland. Well, it was hard to find jobs, of course. Here come all these people out of the service looking for jobs. So he went to work for the post office, and eventually he stayed there. And turned out quite well for him. As a matter of fact, it was my mother who suggested that. He wasn't too happy about it, but he thought he'd try it anyway. It worked out all right. And I stayed in Miami. My family went north. I liked Miami, so my husband liked Miami, so we decided to eventually stay there, and we did. I was married before I had the children. I had 2 daughters and 2 sons. They were all born in Miami, both boys and the 2 girls. I guess I must have done a pretty good job with them. They turned out very well. My oldest son is still in Miami now. He just had his 70th birthday. He had no intentions of working when he, at that point, when he got to retirement age. He got married again. It was a second marriage. They made him city manager. So he's still doing that. He's still there now. And he also adopted his oldest grandchild, which is my great-grandchild. So he's still working now. And by now the little girl is 12. She was 2 when she first came to Miami. and they're still living there. However, his wife does not like Miami. She wants to leave there as soon as possible, as soon as he gets done with his job. She's from Alabama. She won't go back to Alabama. My second son lives in Alabama. He started out as air traffic controller. Whatever year that was, they went on strike, and he lost his job at that point. Then he went into a furniture business, and he did quite well with that until the furniture business went kaput as well. So he's still in Alabama, and that's where he likes to live, and he's got his wife there and children and grandchildren, which by now are my great-grandchildren. Everybody graduated from college, and my older daughter teaches some sort of computer stuff that I can't even think about, let alone know about. Teaches at the junior college, and she also worked for a private company for a long time. And she's starting to retire now herself. And the youngest one, which lives here in North Carolina, is a dietitian and has her own business. And I think she's doing very well, looks like. I've got 11 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren. That's enough. They're all very, very cute. I don't get to see them very often, but that's the way it goes. Well, we did quite a bit of traveling when we first started. It was camping, a lot of it in North Carolina. And eventually we took some trips overseas. And traveling was probably my favorite thing to do. Camping, not necessarily, because it was harder to do. But what housework I have to do camping than it was for staying home. So that's something I never forgot. But we had a lot of fun anyway. The kids, of course, loved it. So then we took a trip that he would save his vacation from one year to the next. And he had something like 2 months. And we camped through the whole United States. And to this day, my children will still talk about it. Now, my youngest daughter, the one here, was not with us anymore. She wasn't born yet. But the other 3 were. That's something I like to do, I enjoy doing. Number one, I was never a happy student, but that's all right. I went to school as far as I could go in Germany, and I never went to high school here because my younger brother and sister needed somebody to look after them while my mother was working. So when I decided to go into nursing, it was after my husband had a heart attack. And I decided it's either selling handbags at Macy's or going to school and learning something else. So that's what I did. I was 36 when I decided to go back to school and take up nursing. Of course, I didn't have a high school certificate or anything, so I had to do what they call the GEDs. And I decided, well, before I take the GEDs and go through all the trouble of studying, I'll go ahead and take the test and see what happens. So I took the test and I passed everything. I didn't have to go do any GEDs or anything. So I went right into the nursing program. There was a beginning of the 2-year nurses. It was a Miami-Dade junior college. And that was, I think, the first nursing program of that sort. We had a regular RN and had to take the exams and all that, which went off all right. It was difficult, but it got done. If I went to school, had to go back to school now, I would go for the RN. I wouldn't go for an LPN. My preference was to work on what we had then was a surgical floor. I don't think they exist anymore because now people go from operating room to a recovery room to an overnight stay and go home. But when I was there, we had them for about a week or so after surgery, and that used to be where I liked to work. I don't have a lot of hobbies, anything like that. I like to read. I used to do a lot of knitting when I was younger, and the group that I belonged to is still active today, so that's been forever. It's been a long, long time. So I hear from them every so often. We did different things. Some of us did knitting, some crocheted, some did needlework, and it was a very nice group. And a lot of them by now have moved away from Miami, and that's not the place you want to stay when you retire. It's not great for retirement.